We're going to talk about budgeting with Sheila Sloan, and we're going to talk about supportive services, cost allocation, payroll, and cash distribution. And I'm going to pull up Sheila's presentation now. And if you have additional questions here, we will be posting the question and answers to our Q&A. And you can also watch the recording if you need to come back to something down the road. We had a question from Diana. Sheila, I have control.
Of course, with any grant agreement, and you get money from it, and there's always rules. There's always these rules that come with it. They're pretty basic, pretty, common sense rules a lot of times. But I do encourage you, when you do get your grant agreement, please read it. I know it's very lengthy, but there are some requirements in there that some people will come back later and say, oh, well, I didn't know that was in there. Well, you signed the grant agreement, meaning you will abide by the rules that are in there, so please at least glance through it to see what kind of requirements are there. Some of the requirements that are in there relate to audit requirements, what kind of a fund accounting system you are required to have, your fiscal reporting requirements, what you can do regarding subgrantees, your internal controls, how you can expend the funds, what kind of allowable costs, how to handle any budget variations, how to handle program income, and what kind of monitoring that you have to do. So it is pretty lengthy, but it has a lot of information. As far as audit requirements, you are required to submit an audit, and that is outlined in Part 3.1 of your grant agreement, and it will say which type of an audit that you have to submit. I would generally say that most of you are probably going to fall up under the standard audit requirements, which is an audit report, a management letter, an SAS 114 letter that are due no later than 9 months after the period that is audited, and that is due to our internal audit staff. Most of you are probably not subject to the single audit requirements for federal funding. However, you will know it if you are. If you expend more than $500,000 in federal funds in a year, then you are subject to that. And those of you who do probably are aware of those requirements and that you have to have that. One of the most important things that you have to keep in mind with this money is, you have to follow fund accounting procedures. You do have to submit your quarterly financial status report that Tammy was talking about, and that supporting documentation for that report is your trial balance from your accounting system. Your trial balance must be able to tie the revenue and expenditures for only this grant. So only these grant activities. You need to identify those in your accounting system. I cannot stress that enough. That is the most important thing that you need to do related to your accounting system. We have to have that segregated so we can identify those particular items when we are looking at this and monitoring. Like here's just a really brief, small example of what a trial balance may look like for, an organization, that defines what kind of expenditures they have and the revenues that they would have for one of their grants that's just for, like a Training for Tomorrow grant, for instance, like this says here. Yeah, it has to be from your system. It can't be just an Excel spreadsheet. It has to be from whatever accounting system you are using. Okay, once again, like the fiscal reporting requirements, and this is actually probably in your grant agreement. So if you read that, in fact, I think the statement actually did come from the grant agreement. Your grantee's financial management system shall be structured to provide for accurate, current, and complete disclosure of the financial results of the project funded under this grant program. Your general ledger must support costs and revenue that are reported to the department, and must allow the tracing of the funds to the level of expenditure adequate for us to ensure that those funds have been expended appropriately and for the grant activities that are outlined in your scope of work. If any of you are potentially going to use subgrantees, which means you will take your money and you're going to subgrant it to another organization to perform basically the programmatic functions of this grant, you must obtain written approval from DCEO before you would do that. So keep that in mind. And if you do use subgrantees, or we give you approval to use a subgrantee, you must ensure that those subgrantees are aware of the same terms and conditions of the grant that you have to abide by. That means like the requirement for the closeout, refund of any revenue in excess of costs. So they're subject to the same terms that you are. And more importantly, you as the grantee, even though they might be a sub-grantee, you are accountable for all the grant funds that are received under this grant agreement, including those that are expended by your sub-grantees. So that's why you must be very careful about who you sub-grant to, and you must monitor them continuously. You have to maintain effective control and accountability of all of these funds, assets, and property that from this grant that you get. You also must have internal controls that are consistent with GAAP, which is generally accepted accounting principles. Internal controls, basically, here's some examples of what internal controls would involve. Like you would have written policies and procedures with references to the applicable regulations that you must follow. You must do timely bank reconciliations that are not only reviewed but approved by someone other than the person who completes that bank reconciliation. And I don't know if any of you are aware, but can we say the city of Dixon? I mean, a lady was responsible for stealing like $53 million. So there's a good case of why you have to have good internal controls, and also segregation of duties. You cannot have someone who receives the checks, posts the checks in your accounting system, deposits the checks, and does the bank reconciliation. That person has way too much control over the cash coming in and out of that organization. So you must have some segregation of duties related to cash and approval of expenditures and vouchering and purchases. So just keep that in mind. Proper approval of disbursements. And also we have to have supporting documentation for your disbursements. And you also need to ensure that not only that you cancel those supporting documentations to avoid duplicate payments, but also that your accounting system is kind of set up so that it will catch you, like say if you're trying to enter a duplicate invoice number or something like that. We just don't want to have any duplicate payments because that will be a disallowed cost if we find that. Here's some policies and procedures manual. At a minimum, these are the things that we would like to see in your policy and procedures manual. I'm not going to read through them. You can certainly read those. I know a couple of you I've been in contact with, and I think Chuck Dooley in our Chicago office has. For those grantees who we couldn't find any history of any kind of grant experience with DCEO or with the WIA program, we are scheduling some pre-award visits to just kind of go over some of these things that are required of you so that, you can have everything in place. And, we want this to be a success. We don't want to come out and find disallowed costs or, have to have you send back money. We want it to be a success as well. So that's kind of why we're doing that. As far as expenditures of funds, they have to be expended on only those tasks set forth in your scope of work. We will require any refunds to be sent back to us for any revenue that you've received in excess of any expenditures that you have posted to your accounting system or that you have documentation for. So any unearned funds at the end of the grant period, you'll have to refund. Your expenditures should be made in accordance with GAAP, of course, sound business practices, and arm's length bargaining, and any other appropriate federal, state laws and regulations. They must conform to the terms and conditions of the agreement, and your expenditures should not exceed the amount that would be incurred by a prudent person under the circumstances at the time the expenditure is being incurred. If you've got two vendors and one of them charges $100 for this item and another one charges $300, just because the one that is your brother owns the one that charges $300, a prudent person would normally just spend $100, not on that product, not $300. That kind of outlines the arm's length bargaining. You can't just give a contract or award a service or buy a good from someone just because it's a relative or something. Definitely conflict of interest possibly there, and also arm's length bargaining. Kind of think of it this way. If it was your money to expend, which technically it is because it is taxpayer money that you're expending, would you buy it at that cost? And like I said, GAAP is the underlying principles that we will look at. Cost allowability, there are some grant funds, that they will only pay for certain things that are necessary to complete your program objectives. Any unnecessary costs will not be allowed. Food, alcohol, entertainment expenses are prohibited, of course. Gifts, donations, fundraising, promotional materials, like Tammy spoke to earlier, those are prohibited. You cannot pay any fines, penalties, or interest costs. If someone is required to have a certain uniform or particular tools, they may be allowable if it's required by that particular work site. And any field trip costs to some registered work sites, they may be allowable, as Tammy alluded to earlier, if it's kind of along with the career component of their work experience. And if you have any costs that are duplicative for, say, a client who may be co-enrolled into more than one program, like if they're enrolled in WIA and also the summer youth, if there's duplicative costs involved, then you will not be allowed to, as they say, double dip and pay for the same thing for that client under both programs. Arm's length bargaining, you can't charge yourself market rate for rent or training and pass the cost on to the grant. It has to be reasonable. You don't want to just enter into agreements with, your brother-in-law, your sister, your mom, your dad, whatever, a relative, just because. I'm sorry. I've got a catch in my throat for some reason. One of the important pieces is for compensation. This relates to your payroll. The cost must be reasonable for the services that are rendered. It cannot be for distribution of earnings in excess of cost. For instance, just because you have these grant funds, you can't just give people bonuses. Because, we got some grant funds left, we can give bonuses. No, can't do that. If you do give bonuses, must be pursuant to an established policy that you already have that is consistently followed by your organization. We, most of the time, reserves for any severance pay or UI are not necessarily allowable. If you're planning on doing something like that, then you probably need to call us first and make sure that it's okay. Any contract employees, they must be properly classified and have proper documentation. And there's some notes there about what the IRS will look at for nonprofits. And travel expenses must be in accordance with the latest state of Illinois travel regulations. If you think you're going to incur some travel costs, you can contact us. We can give you those allowable rates. Or if you've got an established travel policy that's reasonable, then we will certainly look at that. You got to have receipts, documentation. I can't say it enough either. Documentation. Allocation of costs. You might have a proposed budget that says, okay, we're going to pay a certain percentage for payroll or facilities costs for this grant. Just because your budget says you're going to pay a certain percentage of those costs, that does not mean that you can just automatically charge that. You still have to have documentation as to how you came up with that rate, and you have to document that that rate is reasonable and it reflects what benefits were received, and it is on actual activity towards the grant objectives. If you're going to do any kind of cost allocation, you have to have a written cost allocation plan that describes this methodology. I would recommend you direct charge this grant for any activities related to it because it's such a short program. For any budget variations, say you're into this program for a few weeks and you decide, well, I don't think we're going to need as much money in that particular budget line, then contact Tammy and they can do a budget modification with a written request from you to make those adjustments if it's well within the scope of work for the program and they approve it. And program income, if there are any grant funds that we pay in advance to you. They must be kept in an interest-bearing account, and you must maintain them until you use them for the grant objectives. And any interest that are earned on those grant funds must be spent on grant activities, or at the end of the program, they have to be returned to DCEO. And that's what they mean by department, is us. Your grant will be monitored, and we will be providing some technical assistance if you need it. I know there's a couple of question and answer sessions that are already scheduled. We'll monitor for compliance with the terms and conditions of the grant agreement, with any programmatic rules, regulations, or any other guidelines that we, the department, implement. And there will be an on-site fiscal monitoring of the grant, and then there will be any on-site programmatic technical assistance as well. We'll also monitor program activities, like, we'll probably look at the client files to make sure the documentation is there and that you've documented eligibility and all of that. Is that it? I think that's it. Ooh, 2 minutes after. How did I do? Did good. All right. Even with the tickle in my throat. So,
All right, we've got some questions here that we need to answer for the audience and also for our Q&A on the website. So how is the vouchering and payment of funds going to work? Are we going to talk about that in a future webinar?
we can talk about it now. Tammy's right here, too.
We're
Okay,
looking at doing some forward funding of the program up to possibly 30%. So basically what we're looking at is anything, not the wages, WE's wages, but the program support and admin. So we're thinking about up to 30% forward funded to get you guys started. I think what we're probably going to do is we're going to keep the expenses and the costs internal, and we'll be reporting them here for you. And I guess, Sheila, you have any comments on that? When you're doing your payroll, this is why it's very, very critical for your payroll to be done timely and accurately. You're going to be uploading your payroll into Illinois WorkNet, and then there's going to be some validation that's done against that. And then once we have a validated payroll, then we will do the cash request on the wages for that. Can you talk about cash requests and timelines and all that?
Well, like once we get your documentation, and I don't know if we've really set all of this out yet about how often we're going to have you, if we do forward fund you this 30%, then, you're going to have to document to us periodically, that you are expending these funds, or how you're expending these funds. And I don't know that we've worked out all those details yet.
And it could very well, but would be that we're going to require a trial balance more frequently.
Yeah, you may have to send us a trial balance, every other week or something like that, just so we can document that you are expending the funds, in the necessary areas of your grant. And then once, if you get to that point where you're going to need additional funds to pay, pay the kids, payroll, meet payroll and all of that stuff, or as we see that you're expending these, then we will do an additional cash request on a needs basis. And that's something you'll have to work with Tammy and I on. And like I said, I don't know that we've actually worked out every detail on that particular process yet, but we'll be doing the cash request here. And from the point of which we enter that cash request until you get the funds, it's roughly about 10 days. It just varies. Depends on if there's any holidays, which I don't think there's any real holidays coming up except this week within this 6-week program. Possibly Labor Day may affect it, but probably not. So, you'll probably have to be in touch with Tammy and I a little more frequently than you may want to or may not. But we'll make sure that you have the money you need to make your payroll, and we're not going to let you just sit there and not be able to pay the kids. We'll work closely with you to do that.
Okay, next question. Is there any way to spend funds on a culminating event of sorts like a pizza party?
I don't know. We're going to have to go back to, we'll have to ask our manager on that for sure, because that was one thing that they were saying, because we don't want to get in a situation where we're, buying lunch every day and things like that, where most of the grant costs are going just to feed everybody. We'll have to get back to you on that one.
Okay, next question. We have one site who is an after-school matters site. They have asked if they can enroll youth in the Summer Youth Employment Program as well. ASM said that was fine, is an allowable cost for DCEO. The hours do not conflict. They get paid from both programs, or they would get paid from both programs.
So will they be working part-time in each program?
It sounds like it.
As long as it's distinct and they have documentation to support it. You, like Sheila said earlier, you can't like double dip, so if they can, be very distinct and so there, is that a city program, I'm assuming? I'm assuming that's a city program that they're enrolling them in?
I think so.
Okay. Do you agree, Sheila?
Yeah, we couldn't double dip. I mean,
Yeah.
they would have to clearly define who's paying for which piece
Yeah.
or which hours. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
And
And
it's
is
all
there a,
supported obviously by timesheets and invoices and, like that.
all right. And is there a specific mileage reimbursement, or is it based on what the particular organization's standard pay? For
Their mileage rate probably, if it follows along like the IRS rates, then they're good. Because the state rates are usually generally lower than what the IRS gives you. So if they're following the IRS rules, then they're well within the regulations, as long as they have a policy on it, that's what they follow.
All right. Is there a deadline to submit budget modifications?
Well, yeah, this is a more of an abbreviated program. I think we're looking at, well, obviously a July 1 start date and more than likely a December 31st end date. So, if that you're going to have to make a modification, then, sooner is better.
Okay. And there, the program has mentioned that there's a short time period, or we've been mentioning that today. Is the contract still from July 1 today through 6/30 of 2014?
Yeah, and no, probably not. We're probably looking at a December 31st end date.
Okay, so then there would not be a full year program on this.
Correct.
And John has answered our boss is in here. He's answered the funding for a pizza party is not allowed.
Okay. And
Find
another
a
question.
sponsor for that or something.
Yeah, you could do that. We included a participant emergency fund for youth for things such as no money for lunch, clothing, etc. We have created a process to ensure proper use of the fund, but do we need to get it pre-approved by DCEO before purchase? That would be a supportive services question, wouldn't it?
And I think John actually answered it right below that.
Okay, all right. And do we need to pay SUDA for these youth? Are they exempt since it's work readiness program?
I thought SUDA was required.
That we'll have to check. I think SUDA is required.
I think it is.
And then do we need to, can we do a end of the program recognition event, which includes food and certificates? That we would just ask that about pizza party and
No.
I mean,
that,
it's the food, unless you can get a sponsor for it, no. The food we wouldn't allow,
and someone just asked, what is SUDA?
The state unemployment,
All right, and
isn't that
So-
state unemployment? Yeah, I think so.
We'll follow back up on that one just to verify, but I'm pretty sure that we'll get Chuck to validate that.
all right, and then if the end date is December 31st, can a youth come in 4 weeks into the program and complete their 6 weeks?
Are you talking about placing them later on in jobs? I'm assuming that, no, we want the youth to be placed and employed during the summer months.
All right, and clothing
Now,
assistance.
work readiness, may follow a week or so later, but we want the work to be done in summer months.
All right, and then in the Illinois work program, youth were exempt from SUDA. Someone made the comment, so I guess we need to find out, is there a schedule of when reports are due?
Well, in your grant agreement, there's going to be a report deliverable schedule, and from the department standpoint, basically it's just going to be the department status report and the trial balance and supporting documentation, which is due 30 days after the end of a calendar quarter. With the December 31st end date, you'll have basically 2 DCEO reports required. But in Illinois WorkNet, it's going to be a constant evaluation. So you guys have to really be on it out in the field and look at your reports in the Illinois WorkNet system, and we're going to be doing the same in here. So since we have access to that, you don't have to send us a report on that. But like I said, there's going to be monitoring too. So just make sure that your files, like your client files, have everything in it that needs to be in it, and that's in the procedures manual. And just make sure you document and verify.
And if a youth drops out, we can pull from the pool of youth to replace.
Yes. Yes, and we recommend that. If somebody drops out, and that's going to happen, they may get in 1 week and decide that they don't want to do this anymore. I would definitely replace.
And if a youth is placed in the summer, can they continue working through December?
Like I said, once again, we prefer the work experience to be over the summer.
All right. I think that might be the end of our questions. Remember, we will be having Q&A sessions, so if something comes up, jot it down so that we can ask it during the Q&A. On the registrations, we are going to try to put in a section where you can ask your questions in advance of the Q&A. Tomorrow's presentation will be on Illinois WorkNet, the actual online aspects of it. But the points that we need to remember from today's presentation are eligibility of youth participant, document, 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 worksite monitoring, continue to monitor for proper supervision and compliance of your work sites, payroll verification and timeliness. Please make sure that you are uploading in a timely fashion and review the timesheets for accuracy before you report it. Document, 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 verify, verify, verify. Make sure that your general ledger supports your costs and revenue that you report to DCEO, and you must allow tracing of funds for a level of expenditure. Grant funds can only pay for costs necessary to complete program objectives. No foods, no gifts, no tchotchkes, no field trips to places unrelated to a work experience. Uniforms, if they're allowed for the workforce, and compensation must be reasonable for services rendered. You can't pay $300 for something that you can get for $100. So I would like to thank Tammy Stone and Sheila Sloan for joining our presentation today.
Hey, one thing I want to tell you guys too is we are going to be working on processing grants. So Christy Ruppel you may be getting emails from her regarding signatures of grants. So I just want to keep you in the loop that Christy Ruppel is one of them that's going to be doing our grant processing. So if you get something from her, don't disregard it.
All right, great. And we will see everybody tomorrow on the webinar. If you want to hear today's again, we will be replaying this today at 1 p.m. I look forward to working with everybody over the course of the Summer Youth Employment Program, and have a great afternoon.